Hello and welcome once again to Max Level, a show where I give my honest opinion of an MMORPG, then tell you if I think it's worth the time, effort, and sometimes money to reach max level. My name's Relet, let's begin. Today I'll be reviewing Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 is an MMORPG developed by ArenaNet and produced by NCSoft. The game was originally released in the summer of 2012, but recently Guild Wars 2 got a pretty significant update that changed a lot about the game. The payment model is a one-time payment of $50 for the regular Digital Heroic Edition and $70 for the Digital Deluxe Edition. It's a fantastic model, even though there is an in-game shop, which I usually hate in MMOs, but it is actually really good in Guild Wars 2, and I'll explain why later. The fact that you just have to pay once doesn't affect the game's quality. This game has a lot of content, great mechanics, and graphics. ArenaNet also keeps up with updates. Now that that's all out of the way, let's get on to the review itself. Guild Wars 2 has a pretty nice selection for customization. It feels a little lackluster sometimes with hairstyles and faces, but I spent quite a bit of time on each of my characters. One very cool thing about the customization is that you can customize your armor dyes. You can also unlock new dyes by playing the game, in which you can re-dye your character while playing. There are 5 playable races to choose from: the Char, the Human, the Asura, the Norn, and the Solvari. Each race with a different backstory and starter area. There are also 8 professions to choose from: the Mesmer, the Guardian, the Necromancer, the Ranger, the Elementalist, the Warrior, the Thief, and the Engineer. A really cool feature is that they have portals in starter areas that can transport you to other starter areas of your choice. This helps if you make a Char but don't like their starter area, so you can just take a few portals over to one you like. Granted, you have to go back to your starter area to do the main quest, but it's still a great feature. You can also give your character a somewhat unique backstory that will create different dialogue and story progression for the early stages of the story. I say somewhat because there aren't a whole lot of options to choose from, and they only influence the beginning of the game. No matter what backstory you pick, you will end up in the same place as someone who picked a completely opposite backstory eventually. Guild Wars 2 is a beautiful game. After returning to the game multiple times, I found myself often just walking around and looking at the mountains for long periods of time. Tyria is huge and has a huge variety of scenery, which keeps the game fresh because it's always changing up. Not only the amazing graphics, but the music is also fantastic. When you hear some of the music, it's very reminiscent of the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. The graphics and music are both fantastic and immersive. So of course some of the story varies basing off of what race and backstory you pick, but basically Guild Wars 2 takes place in Tyria 250 years after the Eye of the North expansion in the original Guild Wars. From then until now, 5 Elder Dragons have awoken and are devastating Tyria. Each race is faced against one dragon. The Norn to the north face the Ice Elder Dragon, the Asura face the first dragon to awoken, and so on. The main story focuses on one of the Elder Dragons, Zhaitan, and your quest to defeat him and his undead army. Along the way you'll join forces with an order of your choice: the Order of Whispers, the Priory, or the Vigil. With them you'll come up with strategic plans and different tactics to defeat Zhaitan. In the story you'll also encounter the now scattered Destiny's Edge Guild. The guild is comprised of one member from each race and were renowned for defeating dragons, but they can't work out the past conflicts, and thus you have to be the glue that binds them back together. The majority of their story is experienced through the 8 dungeon story modes. These dungeons also have alternate EXP modes, but that's for later. Destiny's Edge plays a pivotal role in the battle against Zhaitan, and it's fun seeing them develop over time. Most of the story is explained through cutscenes, in which 2 characters are plastered on a background and have a conversation. Some of the dungeon story is explained through mail you receive, and the rest is quest text in which you will sometimes be able to make a choice. Either it be strategic or just an opinion basing off ferocity, charm, or dignity. So for just everyday questing, there is no accepting or handing in quests, but instead you walk in a quest zone and a progress bar will appear at the right side of your screen and will let you know how to complete this quest. Usually it will give you multiple ways to fill the completion bar. Feed cows, kill worms, you get the idea. Is this a good way of doing quests? I'm a little tossed on that. On one hand, I enjoy not having to accept and hand in quests and makes progression seem to be a bit more fast paced and you're constantly moving, but I also don't enjoy things like feeding cattle, burning posts, and etc. They do usually give the option to just kill everything, but there isn't a whole lot of variety to the quests. They usually follow a pretty similar curriculum and it gets noticeable. They tried to change it up by making more ways to complete one quest, but I'm still not sure it's what people wanted. It's going to be a very long time until a game gets questing right, and I can commemorate Guild Wars 2 for trying to be the head of that movement, but I don't think they really hit the nail on the head on that one. I do like the fact that there is no mob domination. Multiple people who aren't in the same party can attack the same thing and get the quest progression for it. For once, you don't have asshole ranged characters robbing the mobs. Guild Wars 2 also has events, and often a champ train or some other type of train of people go around grinding these out for whatever it may be, XP, equips, you name it. This has definitely been more of a common thing now that ArenaNet introduced Mega Server and combined all the servers together in instances and made, well, a Mega Server. This is a really fun and great way to gain XP and such. Finally, I just wanted to add that Guild Wars 2 has a zone level feature in which if you are above the level recommended for the zone, you will be marked down to that level. Originally, I hated this, but this is actually good because the XP ratios keep up. If you're getting, say, 7,000 XP in a level 60 zone from the events, and you went to, I don't know, a level 15 zone, you would still be getting roughly 6,500 XP, or something that still keeps up. This prevents high levels from murdering mobs in 2 hits and ruining the fun for the newbies. Level 70s will travel down to your zone and still be able to have fun and challenging battles with mobs. You can fully explore zones you enjoy or that you just want to explore without the constant nagging of I'm wasting time or I'm falling behind. First, we'll start with combat. Combat in Guild Wars 2 is very unique. It is very interactive. You have the ability to dodge, which will make enemies miss attacks, and knowing the mechanics will give you quite the advantage. You also don't have an over-cluttered skill bar. You can only have 10 skills. The first 5 skills are based off of the weapons you're equipping. For example, the engineer can equip a pistol in their main hand, which will give them 3 pistol skills, and a shield in their offhand, which will give them 2 shield skills. Or they could put another pistol in that offhand and have 2 more pistol skills. It might be confusing at first having it attempted to be explained to you, but new players will surely have no problem getting the hang of it. You can also have a second weapon set for classes like the Warrior, which will make it easy to switch between, say, a bow and a 2-handed sword. Your other 5 skills are the unlocked skills you appoint to each slot. The first slot has to be a healing skill, and the next 3 can be anything of the next 3 sections. The last slot can only have a skill from your elite section of skills. Majority of the skills are based off of class, but a couple are race skills. For example, the Savari can unlock an elite skill that will lay down multiple plant turrets. The customization doesn't end there. You can also have traits. Traits are split into sections. For the engineer, they have trait sections like guns, explosives, and defense, just to name a few. You can then buy or unlock traits that you can put into empty trait slots that correspond with the section. There is a lot of customization and depth to the combat that if you take the time to learn all of it, it could give you quite a huge advantage in PvP or even PvE for that matter. Alright, let's get on to dungeons, seeing as I already brought up the fact that the Destiny's Edge storyline branches off into the dungeons and creates a story from that. The story focuses around helping Destiny's Edge members, and by doing this, you bring them closer together to ultimately become who they were prior to the whole Snap incident, and I found it quite epic to witness. The ending to some of the dungeons are a little bit cheesy, but at the same time, some end with members finally reflecting on the actions of each other that broke them apart, and not exactly making up, but at least trying to put their differences behind them because they know
with great power comes great responsibility.
I found it extremely cool that they can't exactly forgive each other because of the pain that was caused by the incident, but choose to try because there are larger issues at play. There are currently 8 dungeons, each with 2 different modes. The first mode is of course story, and the second mode is explorable mode. The cool thing this mode has to offer are multiple paths, which your party will vote on at the beginning of the dungeon. Not only do you get loot and XP from dungeons, but you also get a type of currency. Each dungeon has a different type of currency. For example, the Ascalonian tombs will give you Ascalonian tears, and with that you can use it to, of course, buy things from vendors like armor and weapons. Now on to PvP. There are a few different types of PvP: 4v4, 16v6, and World vs. World. World vs. World is very cool. It's a 24/7 PvP instance, and basically servers are pinned against each other in a capture the point-esque mode with champion monsters on the points. Trains go from stronghold to stronghold, bashing down castle doors with battering rams and sieging them. This gives a whole ton of XP and currency. On your ventures of pillaging strongholds, you will find resistance from the opposing server at some of your stops and have an epic showdown. World vs. World is great for XP and items. 4v4 and 16v6 are your basic game modes and aren't really anything special. Additionally, there is no dueling feature, so this is really the only PvP you can get, which is odd. Sadly, it seems there is no feature for testing your strength and juking mechanics on your friends. Hopefully ArenaNet will include this someday, but who knows. Now let's talk about crafting. There are 3 ways to get resources: mining, wood chopping, and harvesting, though unlike other MMOs, you do not level these skills. You buy pickaxes or scythes or axes to gather resources, and they usually have 100 charges each purchase, unless they're from a special vendor. This means you can gather, for example, 100 iron ore. Your pick will disappear on that 100th hit and you will have to buy more pickaxes. There are a multitude of different types of gathering tools, each with their applicable area level. For example, orichalcum pickaxes can mine every ore because their applicable zone level is 75 to 80. This means everything below level 80 can be mined. However, steel pickaxes have an applicable level of 30 to 60, so they can mine anything below level 60, but not above level 60. Now there are 2 things I have to say about this. 1, you have to buy a lot of tools and make many trips back to a vendor to buy more. 2, you can gather whenever the hell you want, and it saves quite a bit of time on not having to level both gathering skills and your crafting discipline. Now let's talk about crafting discipline. You can have 2 disciplines and there are 8 disciplines to choose from. They are Armorsmith, Artificer, Chef, Huntsman, Jeweler, Leatherworker, Tailor, and Weaponsmith. Each of these disciplines of course have their own accordance to a certain class and have their own specialty. For example, the Chef. Sounds pretty boring, but you can make food that has bonuses like 10% bonus XP on kills, and chefs can also make dyes. These can sell for a lot and make your character or future characters look really cool. Crafting isn't just handing everything to you as well. If you want to make something, you better know what it is, because most likely you're going to have to buy a recipe so that you can know what is needed to make it, or you just throw things into the crafting bench and hope a combination forms. Finally, I want to talk about the Guild Wars 2 community. In my experience, Guild Wars 2 has one of the best communities. They're helpful and they're fun to talk to for the most part. Eventually you might run into an asshole, but they're everywhere. At one moment you could be traversing the beautiful world that is Tyria, and then you will run across players adventuring, and the next thing you know you're doing an event line with them, completely unknowing this was going to happen. This makes Guild Wars 2 world feel as though it's living and breathing. Time for Endgame. So let's start with story. You'll probably have more story to do after reaching level 80, at least that's what happened with my 2 level 80s. Then again, I'm not a huge fan of story in MMOs, so take that with a grain of salt. Also, Season 2 of Guild Wars 2 has released, so that adds even more story and area to explore. Now let's move on to dungeons. There are 8 dungeons, and as I mentioned before, there is an EXP mode for each dungeon, which stands for Explorable Mode. This mode is much more difficult, and even though you don't have to be level 80 to play this mode, most groups will require it. This mode also has different paths in which groups will vote on which path to take. This will add something to keep it a bit fresh, so grinding out dungeons may not feel like such a chore. Of course, crafting is a huge part of the endgame. It will take quite a long bit to max just one of the crafting discipline, never mind the 2 available for each character. It will take a lot of resource gathering, but you can make fantastic weapons, bags, dyes, and jewelry with it. Crafting is very much worth the payout. One thing I didn't mention in gameplay were Fractals of the Mist, or their short form, Fractals. The reason I did this is because I believe they play a much bigger role during endgame than while you're leveling. Fractals are basically dungeons, but they are much more difficult and introduce a number of significantly more difficult bosses. Everyone in the Fractal is level raised to 80, but equipment plays the biggest role in success. There are multiple different difficulty ratings for each individual Fractal. The quality of your equipment and your judgment of what your equipment is capable of determines which difficulty rating to choose. Your personal reward level tracks your position on the difficulty scale, so the higher the difficulty, the better the loot. Fractals were not in the game at release but were implemented later. Their implementation introduced Ascended Tier gear and is the primary source to acquiring said gear. Fractals play a huge role in Endgame, and just looking at the potential gear that's waiting for you is enough to drool over. Guild missions are another addition to Endgame. Personally, I've never participated in a guild mission because I don't usually join guilds in MMOs unless a friend invites me to one or makes one, but these guild missions are pretty cool. There are guild bounties in which you have to track down and slay outlaws, guild treks where you have to find locations for Tyrian explorers, and you also have guild puzzles which are like jumping puzzles, kind of, but also includes the guild to work together. That's only a few of the many things available specifically for guilds. Not only all of that, but ArenaNet constantly updates the game and that continually improves your experience. When ArenaNet introduced Mega Server, they also introduced a multitude of other changes, such as the huge change to the trait system, and at this time was when I made my return to Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 is one of the few games that gets significant changes and additions on a pretty regular basis. There is a ton of things to do at Endgame. Granted, some might be smaller than others, and because I don't want this video to be dreadfully long, I won't bore you with the smaller details. Let's move on to the final verdict. Guild Wars 2 is one of the few MMOs that isn't gathering virtual dust on my hard drive, and neither are my maxed characters. In fact, this is the first MMO that I have maxed more than one character in. Granted, Guild Wars 2 may not be some people's cup of tea because in almost no way is it traditional. That means no DPS or tank roll in dungeons, no dice roll or needing. Exploring is a great way to gain XP and so are events. And also, there are no mounts. People make the argument that Guild Wars 2 isn't quote-unquote hardcore, and to that I say, what the fuck is that even supposed to mean? I wonder if it's because Guild Wars 2 isn't bland and a dreadful grind that it isn't hardcore. Either way, my final verdict for Guild Wars 2 is a 9 out of 10. I think the game is a ton of fun and has the best payment plan. Pay once and play forever, without having to pay a dime more. Now, of course, this is an in-game shop, but I actually really like the shop for numerous reasons. I mean, the costumes you can buy from there are amazing, and some of the sales and limited time offers are incredible. Of course, you don't actually have to buy anything from there, but I have actually bought quite a few items. I think paying $15 a month is pretty ridiculous to play a game, and it's not like Guild Wars 2 is never updated. Like I said, ArenaNet adds a ton of new content all the time. Guild Wars 2 is a game for people from many different demographics, and I doubt many people will regret picking it up. Guild Wars 2 will always be there when the MMO market gets dry, because we all know it does. There are no free-to-play annoyances or billing annoyances, and the game is just plain fun. Thank you all for watching. Now go buy this game.
Fuck is going on here?